Hey guys, anything going on in junior college hockey these days?
Honestly, no, I can't really think of anything, and that's going to be our show for today. We'd like to thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite a bit as it turns out. Dan, been busy.
I mean, it's busy enough where the band's back together. That's what I think about it right now. I mean, you look at the landscape of what has happened, both positive for some players, negative for some players, or maybe we'll find out a little bit in between. And as Lucas, I know you and I have tried to dig through this all. We've tried to learn everything. We thought, who could know about all of this stuff? Who could have all the answers? Who's experienced the CHL? Who's experienced the USHL? Who's experienced the NCAA Division One recruitment cycle? Who's experienced the NHL draft cycle? Who's experienced all these things in their careers? And we look no further than a former boss. And this time we're working for him unpaid. Okay, we might have thought we were underpaid in the past, but we're unpaid now. But I'll tell you what, you don't have to pay me a dime to talk about this stuff with this man. And I want to introduce him in to the folks at home who are listening in, whether you got the email blast, whether you're already a subscriber to the Dan K Show, whether you listen to Ice Level with James Billenow, whatever you listen to in the Dan K Show universe, you're going to want to listen to this one. This man is here today because he's got 11 years coaching in AAA hockey. He's got 11 years of running drafts in the Ontario Hockey League under his belt. He's got 5 years in the USHL where, you know, he just started up all the combines and everything you see today in USHL Central Scouting back in the day. And, you know, he also ran an elite summer showcase for 16 years that, let's look at the numbers. Let's look at it by the tail of the tape. 6,000 plus NCAA Division One commitments. He had over 5,000 plus CHL players in that system. And he also had 1,000 plus players head to the NHL that played in his prospect showcase. 9 of those first overall draft picks. Bob Turow is here with us today to talk everything that's going on. Bob.
What all that tells me is I'm really old. Guys, it's a pleasure being here today. Dan and Lucas, I met you when we were in another league. And Dan, I didn't know what this dank show was that you guys put on. I found out it was a podcast, and I quickly found out that the experience, Dan, that you have working in Major League Baseball, NFL, and the National Hockey League was you were more than dank. Let's put it that way. And Lucas, you're the technical guy here with the subtle humor, a teacher who's in podcasting. So what we want to do today is set the foundation for what the next number of podcasts will look like. There's no way that we can cover everything that's going on in junior and college hockey right now and how everybody and every league and every player might be affected. But you're going to see a lot of numbers tonight. And that will set us up for the future so everybody can understand exactly where we're going with all of this.
Yeah, and anybody tuning in is obviously aware at this point of the ruling where CHL players can now go to NCAA Division One hockey. Bob, we're going to talk to you today about a lot of things, but I want to start with what is this decision all about? I mean, how will this show, Hockey 101, how will this series guide everyone, whether they're coaches, parents, players, scouts, even folks at the collegiate and professional level? What will this do to guide folks through the ramifications of this decision?
We're going to go A to Z, every level, every player, every league. I mean, it's going to have an effect on everything. It's the most substantive change I've seen in my 30 plus years in junior hockey. I'll give you a quick insight. This isn't the first time this has happened. I had a coach one time work for me in the Ontario Provincial Junior League. It used to be, it's now the OJHL, who played in the CHL, played for the Oshawa Generals, and then ended up going to Yale University. So this is not the first time this has happened. Back in the day, there was grade 13 in Ontario, and you could play in the Ontario Hockey League. And then once you graduated from high school, you had to make a decision. You couldn't wait a year and play another year in the OHL and then move on. So it's not new, but so much has changed since that happened. So why is all of this happening? I don't know. I really don't know. You'd have to be in the meetings with Division One, or not with Division One people, but really with the NCAA. I mean, the word on the street is it's litigation. I don't know if that's the case. I was told that at the coaches convention that the majority of coaches did not want this. But regardless, it's the rule now. And we need to take a look at how this is going to affect the OHL, the USHL, every other league underneath it, the NHLPA agents, all the top prospects. Everybody's wondering, how is this going to affect me? It's the rule, the law of the land.
Yeah. And Bob, before I hand this over to you and Lucas, who is our resident teacher here, who can walk us through a lot of information and show folks really what you're diving into, what the detail, the numbers behind all of this. Before we go there, I got to play devil's advocate for a moment, right? Like, what about the people that I'm hearing out there in the world that says, who cares? Right? Division One hockey might get better. There'll be better talent up there. This isn't going to affect everyone. It's just going to make the game better. Like, tell me, why does this matter? Why doesn't life just go on? Why isn't this just another drop in the pond that is junior hockey development up to the game?
Well, first of all, I want everybody to know I have no dog in the fight. It doesn't matter to me who ends up winning and who ends up losing, because there will be winners and there will be losers when this all shuffles out. What I love about this is there's going to be a competition for the best players. And when that happens, there's going to be a fall down to the lower levels of junior hockeys. I would kill to be a fly on the wall in strategy meetings in, say, the Western Hockey League or the Ontario Hockey League or the Quebec League. I'm sure they're all working together. And then I'd like to be a fly on the wall for Division One hockey. Are they working together, the commissioners, to figure out, what direction do we want to take this, or are we just going to let it organically go where it's going to go? I'd love to be a fly on the wall in the National Hockey League office. I mean, the CBA is going to play a part in this. And nobody really knows. We can take some swings over the course of the next couple of weeks as far as what some of the strategies would be. Today, as I said, it's going to be foundational with numbers. We might squeak out a couple of guesses today, but not many. But it's going to be fascinating on what the strategies actually are. Lucas, let's slide into to slide number one for everybody who's watching right now, and it's titled, where do the NHL players come from, who are the best players in the world?
That's right, guys. We're going to start with every young person's question they eventually come to in their life. Where do NHL players come from? And it's an interesting question that, I think is going to shine a lot of light on where this decision could go. But, I mean, Bob, what are you seeing in this data that the average person might not be seeing?
So I'm going to go back to 1967 and start there, guys. Surprise, surprise. So in 1967, there were 6 NHL teams, or in 66, there were 6 NHL teams. And those NHL teams all had junior hockey teams that they owned throughout Canada. And all the players basically came from there. In 67, if you go to HockeyDB or anywhere else, you're going to find out that there were only 5 Division One NCAA players in the National Hockey League. And of course, something in 1980, one of the greatest things happened ever. A group of young collegians beat the Russian Red Army team and won the Olympics in Lake Placid. And I think it woke up the National Hockey League. I'm not sure what number of teams they were. They might have been at 21 at that point in time. But it said to the National Hockey League, hey, there's a lot of good players in America. And of course, we know over time with expansion how the quality of player, not just in the 3Ms, but in Arizona and Florida and all over the place, has exploded in America. When I was in the Ontario Hockey League, and we were looking at who's winning the battle for the best players, the numbers were always kind of 55% for the CHL, the three leagues, 25 to 29% for the NCAA, and then 15% coming from Europe, of course, in '89 when the wall fell down. And as you can see here, those numbers have changed a little bit for two of the three. The CHL, if you take a look at the rosters as of November the 11th in the National Hockey League, they're at 47% of the makeup of the National Hockey League. The NCAA has basically stayed level from where they're at. I've heard reports before that they're way up. I did a lot of research when I was running prospects, and I think they're right where they're at, but I would love to see from College Hockey Inc. what the numbers are. I'm sure they have them, and if we can be corrected, we'll be corrected. Europe's the big winner. So back then, about 15% of the players came from Europe. Now you can see that 23% of the players come from Europe. It's unfair to compare the NCAA with just the OHL or just the Western Hockey League or the Quebec League. So the NCAA has 29, the CHL has 47. If you break down the three leagues, it's clear that you can see that the Ontario Hockey League with 173 is the clear leader of NHL players, 114 for the WHL and 72 for the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, or I guess it's now the Quebec Maritime Junior Hockey League. Why is the OHL the best of the three? I think part of it is population. I also believe that the area that they're able to recruit out of in the United States is a more fruitful area, even though there's players coming from all over America. So when I first started out in the Ontario Hockey League, Ontario could, or Western Hockey League, Quebec League, you could recruit anywhere you wanted to in America. I forget what year it was, but what they decided to do, the CHL, was to divide America up. So the Western Hockey League basically had all of the states west of the Mississippi. That was their territory. The OHL and the Quebec League could not draft players from that area. The Quebec League, Quebec Maritime Junior Hockey League, now has all of the players that are in the New England area. And then Ontario has everything basically from New York State and Illinois and Wisconsin all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. So I think that's a big reason as to why the OHL's numbers are a little larger. But there's no question here, the Euro leagues have been the big winner over time. One thing that I do want to point out, you'll see the USHL and the national team for the United States with small numbers. That does not reflect the quality of their league at all. We'll get into it a little bit later, but the USHL, they just don't keep their players. They send them on to Division One. So the last amateur team that those players would typically play for is a college team in Division One hockey. Everything makes sense there, guys?
Yeah, and I think the USHL number, Bob, is proof to the opposite of what you're warning people about, right? You're not saying you made the disclaimer of this isn't a reflection on their league. I think it is positively a reflection on their league for them accomplishing their goal, which is sending these players on to NCAA Division One. I think as we get deeper into the show, deeper into this dive, into this content as we go through the weeks, one number I'd love to see is how many of those USHL players make up the 222 in the NCAA. That's an interesting number to look at. That's interesting things to see. And as a parent, these numbers, you might be looking, maybe we have tier 3 parents listening in right now. We're talking NHL. I know you're thinking to yourself, the percentages, the chance of my kid playing in the NHL. We are going to dive through each and every level of the game until we get to you, and you're going to be a part of it. Lucas, I think you guys might be ready for slide 2.
Yeah, that's right, Dan. I mean, for tier 3 parents, it's a question of, we asked how many USHL kids are going to D1. Where are those USHL kids coming from, right? Where are they coming from in tier 2? Where are they coming from in tier 3? These are some of the questions that we are going to be diving into. But before we get there, we're going to dive a little deeper into what league some of these players are coming from.
So I'm just going to dig into some of these numbers. If anybody wants to take screenshots of them, that's fine. We've talked about the 173 for the CHL. I think for the NCAA, the big takeaway here is Hockey East and the Big Ten. If you add them together, they're basically 62% of where national hockey players played their college hockey. And then I think if you go over to Europe, you can see the large number of leagues that have produced some type of National Hockey League player. I'd like to really concentrate on 3 of them. Obviously, the Continental Hockey League, which is in 3rd place, basically. But I think a lot of people would say that it's probably the best league over there. I mean, why are they at 29? I don't know. It could be the Ukraine war has an impact right now. I think contracts are a big part of that. And I think once we get a National Hockey League player agent on here, they can speak better to why that number is a little bit lower than the top league in Finland or Sweden. But when you gather together the top Finnish and the Swedish league, it's 81 players out of 759 rostered NHL players on November the 11th, which makes up 10.6% of the National Hockey League, which is a number that's really just exploded.
Yeah, and you start to look at these numbers as you dive deeper into what makes up the NHL, you start to think to yourself, hey, now I've got a trackable. I'm a guy who comes from a world of analytics and taking a look into baseball, football, and hockey and seeing how people watch games, which matchups they watch. And if you ever get mad at home and wonder why the Red Sox play the Yankees on TV a lot and the Blackhawks are in every Winter Classic, go no further than the TV ratings. Look at the Nielsen ratings and you'll see exactly why these things happen. And I think these are our hockey Nielsen ratings right now. This is going to be our gauge to see what the effect of this CHL to NCAA D1 pipeline that's been created, what it's going to do, not just at the collegiate level, not just at the junior level, but also at the NHL level, and how it's going to create a different development pipeline. Does it change the numbers at all?
I've always said the easiest measure, you say Nielsen rating, the easiest measure is to see where the players came from who are playing in the National Hockey League. That weeds it out. If you're a National Hockey League coach, you do not care if a player came from the NCAA, from Europe, or from the CHL. You don't care if he came from Mars. All you care about is winning hockey games, and you win with the best players. It is a merit-based system, and it spins right back to who is winning that recruiting war right now.
And Bob, one more question before we go to the next one, Lucas. I'm going to cut you off too now because I'm into this. I want to ask you, is there a place in your mind, real quick, that it's easier to find these guys? No, you don't care where they come from. You're just trying to win hockey games. It's a merit-based system. Is there an easier place to find them, or is it just nowadays you can find them anywhere and these scouting departments are good enough?
I think the scouting departments have so much information right now, and the National Hockey League teams have so many resources to find players. I mean, back in the day, you really didn't have a lot of tape. I mean, there was teams in the National Hockey League for a while that were doing the majority of their scouting, watching games on their TV or watching games on their computer. The analytics that you get from the various companies help out. It's just a totally different game from a scouting standpoint. The other thing I would say is, listen, players get to the finish line at different ages. Some of them get there as we're going to look, Lucas, you can flip up the other slide right now as far as the age breakdown as the NHL players. Some of them get there at 18. I mean, what you're really going to find out is most players don't make it to the National Hockey League until 22. So how do they get there?
So now let's take a look at the age breakdown of birth year by NHL players. Now, for this group here, Dan and I would be certainly near the oldest on the list. Bob, you would be creating an entirely new demographic here, but with that age comes the experience to be able to look at numbers like this and really paint a picture.
So here's what I see. I just mentioned it earlier. Listen, most players are not getting to the National Hockey League until they're 22 years of age. And you can see that it starts winding down at 34, 35. If I lump, I'm just going to do some mathematics here for you. And this is to tell you what the odds are in your birth year of making it to the National Hockey League. And I hope everybody does. If you lump in the 35 to 40-year-olds and count them as one birth year, and you lump in the 18 to 21-year-olds as one birth year, and then you count each of the other birth years from 22 up through to 34, you basically have 15 birth years that make up the National Hockey League. Make sense? And if you take the 759 NHL players that were rostered on November the 11th, and you divide that by 15 birth years, that means there's 51 players per birth year on average that are playing in the National Hockey League. What does that mean for the CHL, the NCAA, and Europe? Well, if there's 51 per birth year and the CHL has 48% of the players, that means that the CHL in that birth year, the Western League, Ontario, and the Quebec Maritimes League, if you take 51 players and the 48% that they have, that means there's only 24.5 players, 25 players in any birth year from all of those teams that are going to actually be in the National Hockey League at one time. If you take a look at the NCAA and you take the 51 per birth year times the 29% that are in the National Hockey League, it means there's 14.8, 15 NCAA players who are in the 1996 birth year are going to be NCAA players. That's it. Think of the 60 teams that were playing hockey when those kids were there. There's 15 of them that are playing in the National Hockey League. And then you take the Euros, and when you do the math, it's 11.7, which is 12. If you break down the CHL even further, okay, in any one birth year from the CHL, the OHL is going to have 11.8, which is 12. The WHL is going to have 7.8, which is 8. And the Q is going to have 5. And it's clear here that with the exceptions of the Celebrinis and the Owen Powers and the Dahlins, most of these players are never going to see the National Hockey League until they're 22 years old.
What's really interesting is you look at the averages when you break it down like you did, Bob. It's about like you said, like it's 45 to 50 per birth year. So when you're looking at players and you say, I'm going to be one of the 700 players in the NHL, that's not how the number works. It's I'm going to be one of the 50 in my birth year, right? So that number becomes even smaller, Dan, and I guess that speaks to the heart of the nervousness of every junior hockey parent.
Well, and what I think it'll speak to in future conversations with all of us here is that the number, because that's the number of NHL talent in the game at that level, in those leagues, in those levels of play? Or is that the number because that's the pool we have now? The question is going to be on two fronts. Can we grow the game at the NCAA Division One level without watering it down? The SEC adding teams to the Big Ten that currently don't have hockey and other avenues for Division One hockey. Can we add to the NHL level, as Gary Bettman has been talking about doing so much, getting that number to 36 teams eventually without watering down the professional product? And can the development model as it is built today in junior hockey throughout the US, Canada, and hockey over in Europe support that growth with enough talent to make it all work? Those are the answers we're going to get you all throughout this series.
Guys, that's the NHL. But we really, when this all started with this, when this ruling came down, I think it was a week from Thursday, we really didn't start with the NHL. We really started, or I looked at, and I think, Lucas, you can slide over to the age of Division One NCAA freshmen for the 24-25 season. It really started with this frame that you're taking a look at right now. And I really, as a guy who has been doing this all my life, these numbers really just shocked me. And I'm going to throw at the top and the bottom. So if you take a look at the 2006s, that would be their true college freshman year. There's two players playing in Division I hockey this year that obviously were advanced in school, and I think one's playing at BU or BC, and I forget what the other one's playing. And then there's two that maybe have a dispensation for an injury. I'm not sure, but they're freshmen this year. We're really focusing in on the 2006 to 2003. And the 2006s, they have already, for the most part, graduated from high school. And when I saw that there was only 29 of them, I was shocked. I mean, if you take a look at NCAA football or basketball, I mean, everybody is a true freshman. Heck, I watched the Duke Kentucky game last night, and there was a 17-year-old who's going to be, he's a Fantilli, he's a Power, he's a Celebrini, he's a freak. But he's 17 years old playing in Division I hockey. It's almost like Division I has ignored this group of hockey players and just said, you're just going to have to wait. And what I can tell you is, in today's society, people don't wait. There's another option for them. It's called the CHL. And those people are going to be knocking on their door nonstop to get them to come. What we have seen over the course of the last week is some leakage. There are players that are right now commitments to Division I programs that are leaving great leagues like the USHL and the BCHL because they believe, it's not me saying this, they believe that's a higher level of hockey for them to develop their skills. That's what they're saying right now. I'll give you a different example. When I was scouting, there's a tournament in Whitby called the Silver Stick Tournament for U16, minor midget, we'll call it. And it has all the best Ontario teams, and we've already looked at the Ontario numbers compared to the Western Hockey League in Quebec. And then it always used to have 4 or 5 of the very best American teams. When I showed up and scouted that hockey tournament, you would see 100 to 150 OHL jackets, and you might see 1 to 4 NCAA coaches with their jackets on. Listen, if one group is sending out 100 soldiers and another group is sending out 4 soldiers, who's going to win that battle? It's easy. We all know the answer to that. But it wasn't even this number that shocked me the most. When you take a look at the 2005s, and there's only 58, these are kids that have graduated They've waited a year and gone and played junior hockey somewhere, and now they're entering college. And the combination of true freshmen and true freshmen plus a year is 18%. I mean, the question is that going to change? And we'll hit on that later on. But I can just tell you, most parents are not going to wait. It's that simple.
Bob, I think real quick, I think you look at it. You called out the NCAA Division I basketball comparison, right? But if you ask John Calipari at Arkansas University if he could wait till players are 21 years old and another league's going to take care of those players and he's not going to have to pay them NIL money and he doesn't have to recruit them till they're 20 and he can watch them develop, he's going to take on that model. That model just doesn't exist in basketball. It doesn't exist in baseball. It doesn't exist in football. Those guys have to go in at 18 because that's how the model works. The NCAA has a big problem with blanket solutions. For anybody who's ever cuddled with their significant other, some run hot, some run cold. If you just got one blanket in the room, you tend to have one person who's sweating, the other person who's too cold, right? Not everyone's happy. In this situation, this is a time where the NCAA has to put on its decision-making and litigation skills and put on that litigation hat there, that rule hat, and figure out a way to control this issue for the NCAA, right? And figure out a way to help itself compete at the events you're discussing here in these age groups at this younger level. And if you created a world where there was a tiered structure to how you can hand out your scholarships, and you had to have a certain amount of 18-year-old incoming freshmen, or you had to have all 18 or 19-year-old incoming freshmen, there's a lot of things we can get into in this topic that I think can truly help the game.
Listen, you ran off some numbers as far as the players that played in prospects. Okay, like 6,000 NCAA Division I players and 5,000 plus CHL players and 1,000 NHL players. I like to talk to people, and I can tell you that all kinds of them, when I asked them would they be interested in playing Division I hockey, said yes, but nobody was knocking on their door. Not like just nobody. Now I'm sure it's easy to knock on Owen Power's door, okay, but he's one player, right? I mean, there's all kinds of other great players, and they just get tired of waiting. I'll give you a different scenario about waiting. You can have a really good player who's playing in a junior league right now, say as an 18-year-old, and he doesn't get a commit to a Division I school. And for some reason, he thinks, well, that league is not really giving me the best opportunity, and he jumps to another league. How many kids have you seen that started in one league, and we all know what the leagues are, went to the league next door, and then finished in a third league? Now, listen, I get it. If you're working your way in America up to the USHL, I get it. It's the best league. And if you don't have your deal and you get to the USHL, that's going to give you your best shot of getting your deal. But I'm talking about kids that are not getting to the USHL who are good players, but they just jump around. Kids are not going to be patient, plain and simple.
I think one thing that's interesting about what you just mentioned, Bob, this whole idea of jumping leagues to try to find an answer, it could just be that you need a little bit more time to be at that level. I mean, you can certainly feel free to disagree with this, but what I've heard people say is there is a level, there is a skill set. You either have it or you don't, but that doesn't mean you can't build into that skill set. So at the end of the day, the harsh truth is it doesn't matter if you think you should be NCAA D1. NCAA D1 will tell you if you should be, but that doesn't mean that there still isn't time to keep developing. I mean, is that largely correct?
There's all kinds of different development paths that somebody can take, and there's no blanket answer for any of this. I'm just telling you as a guy who's been around kids and parents for most of my adult life. The patience level that people have today compared to 10 years ago, it's light years different. And compared to 30 years ago, like it's not even comparable. You don't knock on my door and say you want me, I'm not waiting for you. Plain and simple. Now, listen, all of this is going to change a little bit because now there's all this freedom, right? And it'll be interesting, and we'll talk about this in future episodes and maybe dip into it a little bit later on here today. Um, but the question is, who's Division One gonna be recruiting out of the CHL? Are they going to be recruiting the 20-year-olds and the 19-year-olds? Or are they going to be going after the 17-year-old who was just drafted in the first round of the NHL draft and isn't ready for the NHL? I don't want to dip into that here right now. I'll touch on it a little bit later, and we'll really dig into it on another episode because there's CBA ramifications and everything. But strategy by these leagues is going to determine if they're going to be a provider to the National Hockey League or not. Plain and simple. I see we've got the next slide up. NCAA freshman nationality and the league they came from. So if you take a look at the nationality, 59% of the players are from America, 30% Canadian, and 11% European. I can't speak to the Europeans, but I will say this. To me, I do not remember this amount from a percentage standpoint when I was at those levels being from Europe. Obviously, Division One schools are doing a good job there. Again, whether they're using TV, obviously there's, I believe, some connections as far as NHLPA agents there directing players. But that number kind of caught me off guard a little bit. I'll speak to the Canadians a little bit. Yes, Celebrini and Fantilli and Power, who I've talked about, played Division One, and I'm missing some, of course, as far as Canadians go. But typically, right now, Division One hockey is getting an older Canadian, a 20 or 21-year-old for the most part. I'm not saying that they aren't good players. I'm not saying that they're not going to be developed into National Hockey League players. I'm sure that has happened and many times over. But if you take a look at those 20 and 20-year-old, 1-year-old players that are playing as freshmen in Division One hockey, and you backdate them to their OHL draft year when they were 15, they were not first, second, third, fourth round draft choices. They were later draft choices or not draft choices at all that developed over time or just needed more time. They were undersized or whatever. And you can see the Americans at 59%. I know, and we're not going to dip into it tonight, but there's a big question that's out there for American hockey right now. Is this rule going to lower the amount of American hockey players playing Division One hockey? I don't have the answer to that because I don't have the strategies that are going to be used by these various leagues. But I know it's a concern because in meetings that I've had in a previous life in the USHL, it was always a current concern to the point where somebody in USA Hockey in one meeting said to me, why do we want Canadians? We don't want any Canadians. And my answer to them was, you want the best Canadians because you want the best Americans playing against the best Canadians. And that's the way everybody gets better, by playing against better players. That person kind of sloughed me off and didn't really like what I was saying because he wanted to see 100% be American players. But that's how it breaks down right now, guys, in 24-25 as far as freshmen go. Listen, we didn't break it down for the entire league, but I think you get a good impression. that, I mean, it's going to follow through like this for all of college hockey. So I want to just go down lower in the numbers here for the development league that a player last played in before they became a freshman in Division One hockey. It is clear the USHL is the number one league. They have the most commitments. They have the most draft choices. It is the place that an American and certainly Canadians, there's a number of Canadians, we mentioned three of them earlier on, that were either first or second round picks, ended up in this league. It is a league that, since I left it in 2010, the owners have made even more investments, and there was big investments that were made back then to break away from the level that they were at. These owners have done yeoman's work for making the USHL, some would argue, the fourth major junior hockey league. Underneath it is the BCHL at 119. And I'm going to foreshadow a little bit here. They're the group that I have the most sympathy for right now. So for anybody who doesn't know, the BCHL left Hockey Canada. Anybody who knows the ins and outs of Hockey Canada knows that the BCHL should have left 15 years ago. In 2005, when college hockey was making big inroads as far as their NHL numbers, Hockey Canada, probably at the behest of the CHL, put in something called the Canadian Development Model, which severely limited Tier 2 Junior A leagues and Junior B leagues. When I say Junior B, those Junior B leagues were every bit as good as the Tier 2, especially in Ontario, from getting their hands on 15 and 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds from out of branch. So going from Ontario to BC or anything like that there was just barriers put up. And so finally the BCHL decided to leave Hockey Canada. They took 4 Alberta Junior Hockey League teams with them, and their numbers dramatically went up last year. I say that I feel for them because in a second I'm going to do some numbers, some mathematics. It's the new math, and the future is different. They just came out with a statement saying that they're going to continue down the path that they are. But when you do the mathematics, it becomes difficult. Stay tuned here in 2 minutes. And then you can see clearly the North American Hockey League is in third place for supplying Division One. What I just said about the BCHL and their path forward for supplying Division One hockey players is, I believe, bleaker than the BCHL. Again, I don't want to deep dive into this because, boy, you'll go into a rabbit hole here, and we can save that for the next episode. And then you can see everybody else. But here's the big question, and I have asked this question of a lot of people that are smarter than I. How many of the 486 freshmen that come in every year are going to come from the CHL? My first thought was 30%. The overwhelming response that I got from people, like I say, smarter than I, was 50%. But let's run the numbers. And I don't know if anybody's right. What I can tell you right now is NCAA teams are living in the CHL right now. And you're starting to see commitments already from the CHL, and you're going to see a lot more. It may take 1 year to get there, but they announced not in January, they announced in November to give everybody time to ramp up. Dan, I'll steal your thunder a little bit. We've heard word in one of these 3 big leagues won't say which, that players who have Division One commitments, those commitments have been revoked to make room for CHL players. It doesn't mean that they might not go back to those players, but if it was pro sports, they're dumping salary caps so they can sign the next biggest guy. I mean, that's what's happening.
Yeah, and we thank Bob Turow here today. But before we let you guys go, I have to have you understand everything that's coming at you over the next few weeks and months as we dig through it all on Hockey 101, your one-stop shop for every bit of information you need to weed through it all, everything going on in the game. We're going to talk NHL CBA. We're going to talk about, how does this affect leagues at all levels of the game? How does it affect my kid? How does it affect my team, my organization? How does NIL come into play with all of this? And what effect will this have there? There's so many questions on the line for all of us today, but most importantly, we want your questions to be answered. Dan, how do I ask those questions? How do I get my questions answered by Bob Turow? And not just Bob, but every expert from every level of the game that we bring on to this brand new series on the Dan K Show. You go to that's the little @ sign for those of you who are a little bit less social media aware, little @ sign, _Dan K Show. You look up the Dan K Show, or you can just go to dankshow.com, or as Bob used to call us, dankshow.com. It's that easy to spell. It's that easy to find. You can contact us there, or you can reach out in the DMs. We will get those questions teed up. We'll let you know what episode to tune into and watch, but keep watching. Make sure you like and subscribe. Lucas, how can they do that?
Well, you got to hit the subscribe button. It's 2 different buttons now. It's not just a subscribe button when it comes to sites like YouTube. You also got to hit the little bell that notifies you when we post a new episode. You should go to www.dankshow.com. You should bookmark it. You should go visit it. That's where a lot of the slides and information will get posted as follow-up to these episodes. If this felt like class, good. That's why we called it Hockey 101, because there's a lot of education that needs to kind of be imparted, I think, on the hockey community, because education and information is power. It's the power that helps you make the correct decisions. So that's going to be at dankshow.com, and then it's at the _Dan K Show on social media. You can follow us. You can hit the bell on those respective websites to let yourself know when those new posts come through. Get yourself entrenched in the Dan K Show universe, because that's where all this information is going to be firing out of.
You can also check out the slide attached now and reach out directly to Bob, as he can get your questions as well. If you want them quick answers and you can't wait for at the _Dan K Show to put it on a show, fire it to Bob as well. You got that up on the screen. You got that for you at home. Bob, we usually have parting words on the Dan K Show, but this is your class. You're the professor. Do you have one last thing to say to folks, and then we're running out of here?
Can't wait for next week when we really dig in and pretend that we're in the war room of all of these different organizations.